Indeed, the name of the show is Ideas, Influence, Impact, and Income. And that's vital. But there's one other thing, another I, that goes along with everything we do, and it is interesting. That's right. You see, when you get involved in podcasting, when you get involved in reaching out to other people, you run into some of the most interesting people. And you learn some of the most interesting things. And so guess what happens? You become interesting, and that might be the very best of all. Well, today, the question is, would you like to write a book? Well, most people never do, but they'd like to. But I'm going to invite you to listen to an interesting gentleman who lived a life as a rancher, as a person just like you and me, and then he went from rancher to writer to author. And we're going to listen to his story. The program is for you for this weekend together, and it begins right now. Well, as I promised you, we always have interesting people here, and you'll learn more here by accident than most places by design. On the other podcast that I do, the Cowboy Up podcast, it was fun to be introduced to a gentleman named Randall Dale. And not only was his story fascinating in that he went from being a cowboy to a writer, that I just said, Randall, come back. Get behind the microphone and tell us your story. So, Randall, you're on.
Well, thank you, Stan. And I think you're right. They may find out something by accident if it's for me trying to teach somebody something. But like we talked before, I had no intention ever of becoming a writer, an author. In fact, I can remember back to my first college English class. I made the professor mad when I said, who in the world would ever want to be an English teacher? This is the stupidest stuff I've ever heard. So I didn't get a very good start. But as life goes on, things happen. And of course, I grew up in a ranching family, and we always had cows and horses, and we did lots of things. And then as I grew up and then went to college and eventually got married and moved away and had kids of my own. My dad called me one time and he said, hey, I need to push some cows. Come on over and help a little bit. So I took a day off from work and I went over and we saddled up and away we went. Well, on the way out to the windmill where we were going to get the cows, he told me, he said, I went to this cowboy poet thing the other day and it was really cool. I think I'd like to do that. And I said, well, more power to you. Go right ahead, because that's the farthest thing from my mind ever trying to write a poem or anything like that. Well, as we were riding along, he said, and this is a story I'd like to write a poem about. So he told me this story he had dreamed up. And, it was a pretty interesting story. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So over the next years, I would take that story and I would tell it to my kids and for bedtime stories. And each time I would tell it, it would get a little longer and a little better. And then I started telling it to the Boy Scouts when I would take them out on a camp out and whatnot. Well, years passed and my kids grew up and went away and got married. And now they got kids of their own. And 5 or 6 years ago, they started after me. They said, Dad, you've got to write that story down. And I said, oh, give me a break. I can't write anything down. I have no desire to write it down. So they kept after me. Well, it's a legacy for your grandkids. Your grandkids need to know that story. And I said, of course, well, you guys tell them the story. Oh, Dad, we can never tell as good as you. And so one Saturday morning, I just sat down at the computer and started typing the story. Well, after about 4 hours, it became very obvious that this was not just a little short story that I could tell in 10 or 15 pages. And I grew up reading, and I read Louis L'Amour, probably every book he ever wrote, and Zane Grey and Max Brand, and all the the good authors. And so I thought, I could make this into a little short Louis L'Amour sized book, because there's enough there for the story. So actually went really quick. Over the next several weeks, I just made it a goal to try to write 2,500 words a day, which is about a chapter. So I just made it a goal to write a chapter a day. And I actually enjoyed it. It was really fun to put this story together and just see the picture in my mind. And it was like a movie that just played in my head. And I typed as fast as I could to get everything down on paper that I was seeing in my head. Well, I finished what eventually became the first half of the Partners Trust book, and I sent it out to my kids. And of course, kids are great. Oh, Dad, that's the greatest book we've ever read. Oh, if you've ever published that thing, it'll be a worldwide bestseller, on and on. And good for kids, they're pretty biased, but it made me feel good. But the thing that actually really turned me on was they started sending it to some of their friends, because I just sent it as an email in a Word document. And pretty soon I started getting emails from people I didn't even know saying, wow, we loved your book. When's the next one coming out? And, as that went on, I thought, wow, that's fun. And because of Amazon now, publishing is so easy. And I got a little help, because that was way out of any realm of being in my comfort zone. But I got a little help, and I got the first book up on Amazon. And then I thought, well, the sequel to that would be pretty cool too. And probably the interesting story about the sequel, and I think this is probably, Stan, what piqued your interest a little bit. When I started to write the sequel, of course, the first story, the first half of the book, or my first book, I had been telling that story to everybody who would listen and just loved that story. So I knew it. I knew it really well. And I knew all the characters really well. But then as I started writing the second book, I had an idea how I would start it, and I had an idea how I would finish it, but I had no idea where the middle was going to go. So I just would kind of sit back and daydream, and pretty soon this movie started playing in my head. And incredibly, people would just show up. They were just, these characters would show up that really had nothing to do with the story, but they were there, and it was like they were knocking on my front door, and I'd invite them in and sit in my living room, and we just visited and talked, and I got to know them, and they somehow wanted to be in the story. One in particular, and just as a disclaimer here, the first Partners Trust book now is these first two books put together. It's a part 1 and a part 2. So in part 2, as I was writing it, I met these people in my mind and just got to be friends with them. It was like they were begging me to put them in the story. And as the movie started playing out in my mind, suddenly they were there, and things were happening in the story with those people included that just fit perfectly into the story where I wanted to go. It was such an incredible experience that, like I say, to me, these people are real people. So anyway, I finished the second book, and I combined the two and made Partners Trust. I got that up on Amazon, and it really surprised me. It took off, and a lot of people read it. It's not a fast-moving shoot-'em-up Western. It's a modern-day Western about this kid who comes into contact with the horse of a lifetime, his horse of a lifetime. And, many of us that have been around horses our whole lives, we've had that horse of a lifetime. And I think that's where so many people enjoyed the book, because they could relate to it. In fact, I had one friend of mine. He's not a reader, but his wife reads stories to him. And so I gave the book to his wife, and she read the story to him, and he just grinned. She said he grinned the whole time, because he says, I had a horse like that. So I think that's kind of touched the nerve a little bit of the people, that the cowboy type people, that they've had those kind of horses. But also I get a lot of reviews from people who've never been around ranching and never been around horses. And they say just like a window opened up to them, where they could see what ranching really was in the Southwest, modern day ranching, and the trials that people go through, and just what goes on a ranch and on an everyday basis. In fact, I got one review that was really interesting. This lady said, I found myself after I read, almost half the book, I found myself stopping and thinking, I should be bored to tears with just every day what this kid named Ricky, what he did every day. But she said it was just fascinating, the little things, the day-to-day things that people do, and with horses and with cows and just things that went on. So anyway, it's been really a fun journey for me, going from never even dreaming of being an author to being an author that actually people are buying my books and enjoying, which is very gratifying to me. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, Stan.
Well, I am smiling a mile wide, so I have a good face for radio for the first time. That is the delightful part of the story. That is what I loved. And a couple things, and then I'd like to just ask a couple questions, because I do know right now that when people hear this, and I'm going to be recommending it for sure to a number of people, and they're going to be wanting to ask you questions. So we'll make a commitment that maybe we'll do that sometime, okay?
Okay, it sounds good.
But let me ask you this, is one of the men that has helped me has been a guy named Stephen Pressfield, a writer. And he, though he came late to any kind of faith tradition, had often said that he really believed, and he actually used the word, that there is a spirit force, and he gave it the name Spirit Muse, that actually would help him write his books. And that got me to thinking, and so I invented a new word. Rather than saying inspired, I said inspirited. That there's a thing about the God of the universe who may actually have a part in giving us a fun purpose in life. And would you say your books were a little bit inspirited? I'd love to hear that from you.
Well, I think they were inspired in large part by the way that I grew up. I mean, we were just country folks, just country kids. We worked all the time, but it was fun work. It wasn't my dad just sending us out to dig post holes. He was there with us. We worked together all the time, whether it was fixing fence or hauling water or hauling feed or gathering cows or whatever. We all worked together. So a lot of the story, at least the Partners Trust books, came from experiences that I had when I was a kid. And the horse, the once-in-a-lifetime horse that Ricky in the book had, was inspired by a horse that my dad had when I was just a little bitty kid. And the character Ricky, and I told Alan this, he's patterned after my brother, but I don't want my brother to know that because he'll get a big head. But my brother was the one that really studied ranching. He really studied horses, and I'll be the first to admit, he's a much better horseman than I ever was or ever planned to be. So in that respect, it was easy to write, and the inspiration came from real life situations. So it's not I don't know that I could write a book about spies in Russia because I have no knowledge of that, anything, but these books are just books that are inspired from the way I grew up and the people that I knew when I was growing up, and some of the old time cowboys that the best description of them will, when you say, well, he was a good old man, those are the people I grew up with. I hope that answers your question.
Well, it does, and I'm gonna do a little say thank you. I'm glad you agree with me, because years ago, when I did a lot of teaching of young men and women to be public speakers, they were required to take a speech class.
Right.
And I wasn't a regular professor. As I said, I was just an overeducated disc jockey who they asked to bring in and teach. And it was at a church college, and I simply said to them, when you write your speech, I don't want you to go and research it in the library. And of course, the English teachers are going to get terribly mad at me for saying that. I knew that. And I said, I want all of your speeches, and I gave them 3 or 4 they had to do. I said, I don't want you to research it. I want you to go into your own experiences in life so far and find the subject in something that's important, powerful, meaningful, or something that moved you. And I'm sticking by that suggestion. And that's what you confirmed, so I'm so grateful.
Yep, it's much easier to write about something you know a little bit about.
Well, and as a result, many of them actually came up with speeches, as I would say, that stirred the mind, moved the spirit, and touched the heart. I remember literally a young woman who started her speech by telling the story. She's going to tell a story about her friend who had been made to get an abortion. She was unmarried and pregnant, and her parents made her get an abortion, and how terrible that was for her. And of course, I saw it coming. And of course, at the very end of the speech, she admitted that it was her.
Oh, wow. That's pretty powerful.
Oh, and literally in a bunch of college freshmen, there wasn't a dry eye in the place.
I bet.
And an embrace to that, and she said, "This is the first time I've ever told that story to anybody because I knew this was a safe place to do it."
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So I just want to share that with you because you're telling people to write by going to their own experiences is, I think, one of the greatest lessons. Please listen to that. Okay?
Right.
I love that. Now, just for a little technical thing, once you got your story, you are absolutely right. You just publish it yourself on Amazon.
Right.
Talk
Exactly.
about that, because that's what people get hung up on.
Well, it's not something I enjoy doing, but basically, and quite frankly, the hardest part of being an author is the editing.
That's right.
It's dreadful. I hate that with a passion. And when I send the book off to anyone who's agreed to edit for me, then they send the corrections back. Then I have to go back and fix things. It's dreadful. It's just dreadful. but it's part of the beast. It is what you do. But then after you get it all edited, basically you just go to Kindle on Amazon. You set you up an account, and if you have a Word document, I mean, it doesn't have to be anything special. They do all the formatting for you pretty much. You just kind of follow the prompts and follow YouTube. You can learn how to do anything on YouTube. And you just follow what they tell you to do, and the next thing you know, you're published.
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So now the hardest part is, and this is kind of a two-edged sword. The hardest part is getting people to buy your books because there are millions of books out there, and unless somebody somehow finds you, they're not going to find you to buy your book because you're just mixed into everything else. And quite frankly, it was frustrating for me because my books are clean. There's, I may say damn and hell one time in the books. There's no sex, there's no violence. They're just good cowboy stories. And it was really frustrating to me that some of my keywords that I put up were clean cowboy stories, almost like Christian books. Not really. They're not Christian books, but they would fit in that genre in that they're just clean. Mm-hmm. And then I would go to Amazon and I would type in my keywords that would hopefully bring my book up just to see how it would come up. And I would type in clean Western or clean romance or Christian books, those type of things. Well, you know what? The first 20 that came up were the what do you call the erotica Western type thing.
Oh, my goodness.
How do you compete against that when those are the ones that all come up when you search? And so many people, the people that actually read my books, they're not reading those kind of books. They don't want those, but how do you find them on Amazon?
Right.
So that's the hardest part. But then the reason I call it a two-edged sword is I would say if you're writing to sell your books and make the money, then go find you another job, because that's not what it's for. I wrote because it was a legacy for my kids and grandkids. It was fun for me. I learned the characters, knew them, and I just wrote. And as a result, almost accidentally, became an author that actually made some money with my books. But anytime I got to the point, and quite frankly, I'm almost to that point right now, if I'm thinking, I need to get another book out so I can sell it, then that's not my motivation. I really don't want to write another book just so I can sell it. I've got what I think you counted them, Stan, 10 or 12 books on Amazon now, and they've done really well. And I had my most recent was actually a Louis L'Amour type Western about a U.S. Marshal in the 1880s in Tucson, Arizona, is named Branson Hawk.
Yes.
Very, very successful series. I sold lots of those books. I need to write number 4, or actually number 5. There are 4 books in that series that did really well. And I've started number 5, but I'm just right now, I'm just not seeing the movie. And I keep telling myself, dadgum, here's people want to buy this book and I can make a lot of money. And then I catch myself and say, that's not the reason that I'm writing the book. And if I'm not writing for my grandkids for legacy or just because it's fun, then I don't need another job. And when it turns into writing for money, then it's just another job.
That's right. Well, thank you so much. Now, if I can just add a little teacher, disc jockey, writer myself clue to this, is you should take this podcast and you should play it again 3 or 4 times, because each time you play it, you're going to learn something new from Randall about that, and very, very much that this was written from the heart, and he accidentally did something that I would advise you to do. In effect, before he wrote the book, he got about 3, 4, 5, eventually 12 people who liked it. And there you had, as the master entrepreneur did, you've got 12 followers. Start there. So
good advice.
Yeah, and please play it again, Randall. Please promise me that when you get that, when the story comes back, when the movie starts again for the next book, you'll let me know, because we'll talk about that. But I just know that from time to time, people are going to want to hear more advice for how they can not write a book for money, but tell a story for a legacy.
Hey, that sounds good for me. You call me anytime.
Very good. Thank you so much. Best and blessings to you, and we'll be in touch. Bye for now.
Thank you.
And indeed, we told you, you'd learn something interesting from some very interesting people. And thanks to Randall Dale. I hope that encourages you to see and to say and to perhaps be bold enough to say, hey, I am going to do it. I'm going to do it. The second quarter of the better year, hopefully, is here, and that's the project I'm going to probably start on. Start by writing to people you know and love. Write to friends. Write to children. Tell stories, and see what might happen. I'm Stan Houston, and the program is designed to help you do what you want to do, what you can do to make things happen. It's ideas, influence, impact, income, and ways to make yourself a little more interesting. Hey, would you like to be on the program? We'd love to do 2 things. First of all, I'd love to teach you how to have your own program just like this, because you can now. Right now, 4 people, maybe even my friend Randall, will say, you know what? I ought to do this on a regular basis. But a number of people are doing that, and it's the way that you can reach out with your wisdom, insight, and truth. And perhaps you'd like to audition to be on this program to start your first guest appearance on the Creator Entrepreneur Podcast. Reach out to me at stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com. Remember, it's your turn in your town, and it's your world, and you're on the radio. All the best and blessings to you. Take care as we enter into a very sacred time of the year for those of us in the Christian tradition. May you understand that good things come out of tragedy, and in fact, life and life everlasting can be a result of tragedies that befall us, and when we become people who overcome. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye for now.